In the heart of ancient China, beneath the shifting sands and rolling plains, a colossal tomb lay hidden for centuries, an empire's legacy carved into the earth, buried in silence. The Qin Dynasty, a brief but brutal reign, left a mark on history not through the glory of its conquests, but through the immeasurable cost of its emperor's ambition. The mausoleum of Emperor Qin Shi Huang, a final resting place that would be home to 8,000 life-sized clay soldiers, horses, and chariots, stands as a testament to a ruler's obsession with immortality. But the path to immortality was paved with the suffering of countless lives. As the emperor's dream of an eternal reign was brought to fruition, thousands of men and women, desperate and forgotten, were forced into a deadly cycle of labor, starvation, and fear. Their lives, their cries, are now nothing more than whispers in the shadow of the emperor's tomb. The story of how one man's death would cost the lives of thousands is not just a tale of ambition, but one of human tragedy, the cost of power and the price of immortality. But as you hear this, remember, history is written by the victors. Those whose suffering was used to build the emperor's monument are lost to time, their stories buried beneath the weight of stone and dust. Before we move deeper into the heart of this tragedy, if you find yourself captivated by this tale, please take a moment to like and subscribe. This is just the beginning. Now, let us uncover the price of an emperor's eternal dream. The first part of this tale will take us through the beginning of Emperor Qin Shi Huang's rise to power, his obsession with immortality, and the measures he took to protect his legacy became legendary. This chapter will explore the human cost of his vision, focusing on the brutal labor force that built his grand mausoleum. Thousands of workers, prisoners of war, and peasants were conscripted to toil in treacherous conditions, knowing they would never see the fruits of their labor, only the cold, unforgiving earth beneath their feet. As we move deeper, the harshness of their treatment, the squalid living conditions, and the brutal punishments they faced for the slightest transgression will all become apparent. What emerges from this chapter is not just a story of a tomb, but of people whose lives were consumed by a ruler's insatiable desire for power and control. In the second part, we will widen the lens, examining the broader societal impacts of Emperor Qin Shi Huang's reign. How did his obsession with immortality shape the future of the empire and its people? What myths and legends were born from his death, and how did his legacy continue to haunt China long after his dynasty fell? This chapter will also address the enduring myth of the Terracotta Army, the silent, stoic soldiers who stand guard over a dead emperor, frozen in time. The land of Qin was far from peaceful when Qin Shi Huang ascended the throne. A fractured kingdom, plagued by internecine warfare, lay in ruins, an empire in waiting. He was just a boy, barely 13, when he inherited a throne built on a legacy of bloodshed, deceit, and ambition. But there was something within him that separated Qin Shi Huang from every other ruler in history. An all-consuming desire to forge an empire that would stand eternal. But to secure that eternity, Qin Shi Huang's ambition would need more than mere conquest. He needed more than just the walls of a palace or the fortifications of a city. No. What he desired was far more insidious, more grandiose. His vision stretched beyond his lifetime. His dream was of immortality itself. In 221 BCE, after years of relentless campaigns, Qin Shi Huang succeeded where so many had failed. He united the warring states of China under one rule, becoming the first emperor of a unified China. Yet this victory did not bring peace, only greater hunger. His desire for control stretched beyond the living. He sought dominion over death itself. His rule was punctuated by the establishment of a vast, bureaucratic empire that crushed dissent and established a unified law. But the cost was high. He enslaved his people, forced them into servitude, and conscripted them to serve his vision of eternal life. Amid this consolidation of power, the emperor's mind turned toward the creation of his final resting place. It would not be a simple tomb, but a monumental representation of his power, his legacy to echo through the ages. A tomb of such scale that it would surpass anything ever seen in history. To house his eternal soul, a mausoleum would rise, one that would require not only the efforts of thousands, but the sacrifice of their very lives. But how do you build a tomb for an emperor who believes that death is but a fleeting obstacle to eternal reign? The emperor's vision was not merely to bury himself in the earth. No, he desired an army that would serve him in the afterlife. These soldiers, made of clay, would forever stand guard over his tomb. But the construction of this mausoleum and the army within it would demand more than labor. It would demand flesh, blood, and souls. Thousands of laborers, prisoners of war, and convicts were pressed into service, each with no choice but to comply. It was not a call to arms, but a summons to a fate worse than death itself. Conscription into the emperor's grand project meant a sentence of suffering, where the wages were meager, the hours were long, and the punishment for any failure was immediate and brutal. The emperor's overseers, merciless in their demands, cared only for the completion of the project. The men who built his tomb were no different than slaves, chained not by iron, but by the inescapable will of the emperor. In the early days of construction, the workers were forced to work in unbearable conditions. The oppressive heat of the summer sun, the cold that gripped the earth in winter, the unrelenting hunger that gnawed at their insides, these were the companions of the laborers. The emperor had no mercy, and his workers knew that any attempt to escape the grueling task would be punished with death. So they labored on, day after day, toiling in silence beneath the weight of their sorrow. And what did they see as they worked? Vast pits of clay, endless rows of statues, each one meticulously crafted, but devoid of life. An army of soldiers frozen in place, locked forever in a formation that could never march, never fight. But for those who built it, the tragedy was not in the statues, but in the faces of their comrades, pale, hollow-eyed men whose lives were stolen by the very labor they had been forced to perform. Yet the toll on the human spirit was even greater than the toll on the body. As the laborers labored, their families were left behind. The emperor had made sure that his construction project was built not only by the strongest and most able men, but by those who had nothing left to live for. Many came from distant villages, forced to leave behind children, wives, and homes, never to return. Some were prisoners, men who had been captured during Qin Shi Huang's campaigns, their fates sealed by the whim of the emperor. Their only crime had been survival. Now they would pay for that survival with their lives. As the years wore on, the workers began to wither away. Their faces pale, their eyes dim, their bones brittle. Some simply dropped where they stood, their lives snuffed out by the relentless work. Others were left to starve, their bodies too weak to endure the harsh conditions. The emperor's desire to create an empire that would stand beyond time came at an unimaginable cost. The air in the work camps grew thick with the smell of sweat, blood, and despair. There were no songs, no laughter, only the steady sound of picks striking stone and the distant cries of men falling to the ground. And in the background, the looming presence of the emperor's tomb, its size growing with each passing day, stood as a grim reminder that the workers were not building a future for themselves, but a monument to a dead man's dream. This was the silent sacrifice that history would forget, Those who had been forced to build the emperor's tomb, those who had lost their lives to his ambitions, were buried in unmarked graves. Their suffering faded into the annals of history, overshadowed by the grandeur of the mausoleum they had created. The emperor's grand vision did not end with the construction of his tomb. No, Qin Shi Huang's obsession with immortality stretched far beyond the earthly realm. The Terracotta Army, those silent, motionless soldiers guarding his tomb, were meant not only to protect his body in the afterlife, but to serve him in eternity. It was a representation of his godlike reign, a demonstration that even death could not sever the bond between emperor and empire. But in the creation of these lifeless guardians, another form of sacrifice took place, one that transcended the physical. Every detail of the terracotta soldiers, their faces, their armor, their postures, was meticulously crafted. Workers were forced to toil endlessly under the harshest conditions, sculpting the figures with such precision that some even bore facial features believed to resemble real people. These artisans were among the few who had any semblance of artistic skill, but they were still slaves to the emperor's will. Their talents not their own, but claimed by a tyrant who saw them as mere instruments of his eternal quest. The men who formed the army were as much prisoners of their craft as the men who built the tomb itself. The sculptors lived under constant threat. Any mistake, any flaw in the creation could lead to a swift and brutal punishment. For them, perfection was a prison. There was no room for error in the emperor's vision, and the consequences for failure were harsh and swift. Those who did not meet the emperor's expectations were either executed or forced to face unimaginable suffering. The air around the work camps was thick with the tension of fear. There was no escape. Even if a worker managed to flee, the emperor's soldiers would hunt them down without hesitation, for no one was allowed to defy the emperor's will. And still, the work continued as men labored, one clay figure after another, under the unforgiving eyes of their overseers. The emperor's ambitions fueled the construction, but it was the sweat and blood of the laborers that kept the project alive. Thousands of them over many years shaped these statues with the desperate hope that perhaps, just perhaps, their work would be enough to see them through the torturous days. But in truth, many were too exhausted to hope for anything at all. Hope had long been stripped away, replaced by the grim reality of their endless toil. Even the materials were a testament to the emperor's wasteful obsession. The clay used to form the soldiers was harvested from distant quarries, the rocks carried by human hands over treacherous terrain. The workers, already burdened with hunger and exhaustion, were forced to endure even more hardship. But no matter how tired, how sick, how broken they became, they were pushed onward. In the grand design of the emperor, they were nothing more than tools. Tools to be used and discarded, just like the statues they crafted. And as the mausoleum grew, so did the emperor's paranoia. Qin Shi Huang's obsession with immortality became a driving force that consumed not just his workers, but his own mind. He feared the afterlife would bring him nothing but endless suffering. Even as he ordered the construction of his grand tomb, he sent his trusted men on a futile quest to find the elixir of life, the fabled potion that would make him immortal. In his arrogance, he believed that nothing, even the natural order of life and death, could stand in his way. But immortality, as he would soon learn, was not something that could be granted by the gods or purchased with the lives of men. It was something that would be beyond even his reach. And yet, the emperor's legacy would continue to live on, not through the immortality he so desperately sought, but through the very tomb and army he built. The terracotta soldiers, for all their stillness and silence, would stand as witnesses to his ambition long after he was gone. But immortality, as he would soon learn, was not something that could be granted by the gods or purchased with the lives of men. It was something that would be beyond even his reach. And yet, the emperor's legacy would continue to live on, not through the immortality he so desperately sought, but through the very tomb and army he built. The terracotta soldiers, for all of their stillness and silence, would stand as witnesses to his ambition long after he was gone. And yet, the workers who had created the emperor's eternal army, their names, their faces, their stories have been forgotten by time. History remembers the emperor, remembers his power, his victories, his quest for eternal life. But the laborers who spent their last days in the shadow of his greatness remain nameless, faceless, lost to history's cold gaze. Their sacrifice is hidden beneath the weight of the emperor's dream, buried in the same dust that would eventually claim their bodies. But still, their suffering is written into the very stone of Qin Shi Huang's tomb. The bones of the workers rest in the earth, their spirits entwined with the clay soldiers they created. The cost of the emperor's eternal ambition is not just the bones of the dead, but the broken hearts of those who lived to build his monument, knowing that they too would be consumed by the very machine they had set in motion. As we stand before the grand mausoleum of Emperor Qin Shi Huang today, a monument that reaches toward the heavens and casts a shadow across the centuries, we must remember the true cost of this legacy. The towering figures of the Terracotta Army may appear eternal, standing guard over the emperor's final resting place, but beneath their still faces lie untold stories of human suffering, sacrifice, and tragedy. The workers who built the tomb, the men and women whose lives were consumed by the emperor's vision, were nothing more than pawns in his quest for immortality. Thousands perished in the shadows of this grand project, their names forgotten, their sacrifices erased from history. They were the silent builders of the emperor's dream, but in the end, they became part of the very monument they created, a testament not to the emperor's power, but to the cost of his ambition. Qin Shi Huang may have sought eternal life, but what he left behind was a legacy of death. His empire, founded on blood and ambition, crumbled after his passing, and the very tomb he constructed to preserve his glory would eventually become a symbol of his hubris. The Terracotta Army may have stood watch for over 2 millennia, but it is the forgotten workers who paid the ultimate price, sacrificed in the name of a dream that was doomed to fade. In the end, we are left with a powerful lesson. The thirst for immortality, for power, and for control can consume not only those who seek it, but those who are forced to build it. The true cost of a dynasty is not measured in the stone that is laid or the riches that are amassed. It is measured in the lives lost, the dreams unfulfilled, and the generations left to suffer the consequences. As we reflect on the echoes of the past, let us remember that history is not only written by the victors, but also by the forgotten, the nameless souls who lived and died for the ambition of others. And in the shadow of Qin Shi Huang's tomb, their sacrifice stands as a silent reminder of the price of power. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more explorations into the untold chapters of history.